You couldn't live the life of a Roman soldier, and now you're about to find out why. We tend to think of Roman legionnaires as invincible conquerors in shining armor, builders of an empire. But what if I told you that everything you believed was wrong? Behind the shiny facade lay a life of grueling labor, constant deprivation, an oppressive routine that would break most modern people. The glory went to the commanders, while the legionnaires were left with endless miles of road under their feet and the weight of equipment on their shoulders. Their life was far from epic battles. It was a daily struggle for survival. Watch the video to the end to find out why a legionnaire's worst enemy was not a barbarian with a sword, but his own knapsack, and how a simple soldier's diet became an instrument of control. Are you ready for the shocking truth about what service in the Legion was really like? The first thing a recruit faced was not battle, but his own equipment, known as the sarcina. This soldier's knapsack was his constant companion and the main cause of suffering throughout his service. Imagine a modern tourist complaining about a heavy backpack weighing 15-20 kilograms during a day hike. A Roman legionnaire carried 2 to 3 times that weight every day for decades of service, while also having to remain combat-ready and set up camp upon arrival. If you tried to spend even a week with such a load, you would understand that Roman military service was primarily a test of physical endurance rather than military skill. Modern research shows that constantly carrying heavy loads leads to serious problems with the spine, joints, and muscular system. Roman legionaries did not have modern knowledge of sports medicine, ergonomics, or physical therapy, so their bodies were subjected to devastating effects without any scientifically based protection or recovery. The weight of this equipment was enormous and could reach 45 kilograms. It included not only personal weapons and armor, but also everything necessary for life on the march. Soldiers had to carry tools for building camps: a saw, a pickaxe, a shovel, and a basket for soil. Each item in the sarcina had a strictly defined place and purpose, which turned packing and unpacking into a complex ritual. Soldiers had to be able to find any item in the dark, as there was no time to search for things in combat conditions. The packing system was passed down from veterans to recruits as vital knowledge on which not only comfort, but also survival depended. Distributing weight across the body required an engineering approach. Incorrectly stowed cargo could lead to loss of balance, skin chafing, or damage to equipment. Soldiers developed individual fastening systems using additional straps and pads. Experienced legionnaires could tell by the sound whether a comrade had stowed his cargo correctly. In addition to tools, the knapsack contained personal items: spare clothing, a cooking pot, and a bag of salt. Each legionnaire also carried provisions for several days, usually in the form of grain. This load had to be carried, not just carried, but carried on the body during marches of many kilometers. Personal belongings were kept to an absolute minimum. Every gram counted. Spare clothing often consisted of a single change of underwear and patches for repairing the main equipment. The cooking pot was used not only for cooking, but also as a container for water, a digging tool, and even an improvised helmet in critical situations. Provisions required special attention. Grain had to be protected from moisture, rodents, and spoilage, while ensuring quick access to it. Soldiers used special leather bags with airtight fasteners and additional protection against mechanical damage. The loss of food meant starvation until the next supply, which could happen in a few days or weeks. Modern reenactors who attempt to follow the Legionnaire's route with full equipment describe it as an incredible test of endurance. But Roman soldiers did this every day for 25 years of service. Their backs and legs were constantly under enormous strain. Medical studies of modern reenactors reveal serious problems after just a few days of such strain: lower back pain, joint inflammation, muscle spasms, and foot deformities. Roman legionaries experienced these problems for decades without access to modern painkillers, physical therapy, or orthopedic devices. Their bodies adapted to constant pain as a normal part of life. Archaeological studies of the remains of Roman soldiers confirm the presence of characteristic skeletal deformities. Spinal curvature, arthritis, and changes in bone structure caused by the constant carrying of heavy loads. These physical changes were the price they paid for serving the empire, and remained in their bones even after 2 millennia. This burden transformed the legionnaire from a warrior into a veritable pack mule. The main task on the march was not to fight, but simply to reach the destination without collapsing from exhaustion. The glory of Rome's great conquest was built on the shoulders of these nameless porters. They moved in tight formation in all weather conditions, on dusty roads or soggy mud. In summer, they were tormented by heat and thirst, in winter by cold. And all this time, the weight on their shoulders never lessened. Climatic conditions exacerbated the burden of the load. In the heat, the metal parts of the equipment heated up and burned the body. And in the rain, wet clothes and leather elements became even heavier. In winter, frozen straps lost their elasticity and rubbed the skin until it bled. Dust clogged all the crevices of the equipment, creating additional friction and discomfort. The marches continued regardless of weather conditions. The legions moved under the scorching sun of the African deserts, through snow-covered alpine passes and swampy German forests. Soldiers learned to sleep on the move, doze while standing, and find strength when it seemed they had none left. Endurance became not just a physical quality, but a way of thinking. Soldiers could not simply discard part of their equipment to make their journey easier. The loss of any item was punished severely. Every item was considered state property and was vital to the functioning of the military machine. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about how such constant physical discomfort affected the psychological state of the soldiers? Write about it in the comments. What if I told you that Rome's main weapon was not the sword, but the shovel? The daily life of a legionnaire consisted not of battles, but of endless marches. The standard daily march was about 30 kilometers, and it had to be completed at a strict pace, carrying all that equipment. Imagine a modern hiker who considers a 10-kilometer hike a serious achievement, especially with a backpack. A Roman legionnaire covered 3 times that distance every day, carrying a load 2 to 3 times heavier, while maintaining formation and being ready for battle upon arrival. If you tried to repeat such a regime for at least a week, you would understand that the Roman army was primarily a machine for covering distances, and military operations were only a small part of a soldier's service. The pace of the march was determined not by the comfort of the soldiers, but by the strategic requirements of the command. The legions had to appear where they were not expected and disappear before the enemy had time to organize a pursuit. This mobility required each soldier to become a living, walking machine, capable of functioning in any conditions without interruptions or breakdowns. These marches were not walks on flat roads. Often, the legions moved through hostile territory where there were no roads at all. In this case, the soldiers themselves became road workers, paving the way for themselves and their baggage train. They cut down forests, drained swamps, and built causeways. This work was no less exhausting than the march itself. Each soldier had to not only walk, but also constantly work with a pickaxe and shovel. Road construction was carried out according to strict engineering standards. The Romans were not satisfied with temporary trails, but created long-term communications for future operations. Soldiers had to level the surface, lay stone foundations, provide drainage, and build bridges over obstacles. This work required knowledge of geodesy, engineering, and architecture, which every legionnaire had to possess. The technology for building gates across swamps was particularly complex. Hundreds of trees had to be cut down, processed, laid in the correct order, and secured. The soldiers worked waist-deep in mud, under constant threat of attack from local tribes who used the swamps as natural protection. Every meter of such a road cost enormous physical effort. Discipline on the march was ironclad. No one could fall behind or stop without orders. Any sign of weakness was immediately suppressed by the centurions, who maintained order with their famous vine. The control system on the march was total. The centurions constantly moved along the column, watching every soldier. They had to notice signs of fatigue, illness, or demoralization before it affected the overall pace of movement. The vine was used not only as a punishment, but also as a means of maintaining rhythm. Blows to the back forced those who lagged behind to quicken their pace. Medical care during the march was minimal. Soldiers with minor injuries had to keep moving, and only serious injuries or illnesses entitled them to be transported in the baggage train. Such harshness was a necessary measure, as stopping the column would jeopardize the entire operation. Every legionnaire knew that his personal suffering was secondary to the completion of the combat mission. The end point of the day's march was not rest in warm barracks. Every evening, regardless of fatigue, the legionnaires had to build a fortified camp. This was a complex engineering task that required the coordinated work of the entire unit. They dug a trench, built a rampart, and erected a palisade on top of it. Each soldier knew exactly what to do and was responsible for a specific section of the work. The camp had to be erected in a few hours before nightfall. The construction of the camp was practiced to perfection. Each soldier knew exactly how many cubic meters of earth he had to dig, where to place his tent, and how to install the palisade. The size of the camp and the layout of the streets and gates followed uniform standards, which allowed any legionnaire to find his way around any Roman castrum in the dark. The quality of the fortifications did not depend on the fatigue of the builders. The moat had to be of a strictly defined depth and width. The rampart had to be of the required height, and the palisade had to have the correct slope. Centurions checked each section of the work and forced any work that did not meet the standards to be redone. The safety of the entire legion depended on the conscientiousness of each soldier. But what if I told you that even the food that was supposed to keep them going became another source of problems? Are you ready to find out what was really behind the famous soldier's diet and why legionnaires were often hungry?
Debts accrue faster.
I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of the Roman army. We are accustomed to thinking that service in the legion was a way to improve one's financial situation. In reality, for many soldiers, it became a path into a debt trap from which it was almost impossible to escape. Imagine a modern situation where an employer officially pays a decent salary, but then deducts the cost of work clothes, cafeteria meals, tool rentals, and mandatory contributions to corporate funds. The Roman system of paying legionnaires worked on exactly this principle, turning a nominally high salary into real poverty. If you served as a legionnaire and calculated all the mandatory expenses, you would find that after all the deductions, you would be left with pennies in your pocket. The economic psychology of such a system was ingeniously cruel. Soldiers saw high figures for their salaries in their documents, which created the illusion of decent pay, but the reality was completely different. This gave rise to a constant feeling of deception and frustration, which the command skillfully directed against external enemies rather than against their own system. On paper, a legionnaire's salary looked decent. However, numerous deductions were made from this amount. Soldiers had to pay for everything they received from the state. The first and largest expense was food. The cost of the daily ration was deducted from the salary. Thus, the soldier himself paid for his meager sustenance. The paradox was that soldiers could not refuse this food or find a cheaper alternative. They were obliged to buy provisions from army quartermasters at fixed prices. These prices were often inflated compared to civilian markets, but soldiers had no choice. The quality of the food remained minimal. Coarse grain, salty meat of dubious freshness, and sour wine. The pricing system for army food was opaque and often corrupt. Quartermasters could set inflated prices, profiting personally at the expense of the soldiers. Complaints about such abuses were handled by the same people who were involved in them, which made protests pointless. The second item of expenditure was equipment. Every piece of armor, weapon, and clothing was purchased by the soldier on credit from the legion. Any repairs or replacements of lost items were also paid for by the soldier. The cost of a full set of military equipment was several times the annual salary of a private legionnaire. Soldiers received this equipment on credit and had to pay for it in installments over many years of service. At the same time, they were fully responsible for the safety of each item. Loss or damage meant additional expenses. The quality of the equipment issued was often mediocre, but the prices were set as if for first-class products. Soldiers could not choose a supplier or haggle over the price. They were forced to accept what they were offered at the assigned cost. Repairs were also more expensive than in civilian workshops, but it was forbidden to turn to private craftsmen. In addition, there was a mandatory contribution to the so-called unit fund. This money was used to organize celebrations and various rituals. Participation in this was compulsory. There was even a contribution to a funeral fund. This was used to pay for a dignified send-off for fallen comrades. It was a kind of compulsory life insurance that the soldiers paid for themselves. The funeral fund was a particularly cynical part of the system. Soldiers paid for their own future funerals with no guarantee that the money would actually be used for its intended purpose. The fund was managed by officers who could use the money for other purposes, leaving fallen comrades without a dignified burial. Contributions to the unit's cash register were often spent on lavish feasts for officers, while ordinary soldiers had to make do with modest celebrations. The compulsory nature of these contributions made them an additional tax on poverty, as soldiers had no say in the size of the contribution or how the funds were used. As a result of all these deductions, legionnaires received only a small portion of their nominal salary. This money was barely enough to cover minor personal expenses. There was no question of saving or sending anything to their families. This system turned soldiers into perpetual debtors to the Legion. They were economically tied to their service. The only way to pay off their debts and make any profit was through military looting. The psychological impact of constant debt was devastating. Soldiers lost hope for financial well-being and became dependent on the mercy of the system. They could not plan for the future because they did not know when they would be able to pay off their current debts. This uncertainty made them more susceptible to manipulation by the command. This is why legionnaires participated so eagerly in the looting of captured cities. It was not simply cruelty, but their only chance to improve their financial situation. But even here, most of the spoils were taken by the commanders. The system of distributing military spoils was as unfair as the system of payment. The commanders appropriated the lion's share of the trophies, leaving the soldiers with pitiful crumbs. At the same time, it was the ordinary legionnaires who risked their lives in battle and carried out the capture of the spoils. Such injustice gave rise to bitterness and resentment, which manifested itself in particular cruelty towards the vanquished. Looting became the only way to compensate in some way for years of financial deprivation. Soldiers became predators not by nature, but by the coercion of an economic system that left them no other means of survival. This explains the ruthlessness with which the Roman legions treated the territories they captured. Thus, the economic system of service was built on keeping soldiers in constant dependence. They could not leave because they were in debt. Their loyalty was bought not by high salaries, but by the lack of any other choice. This system of debt slavery was more effective than coercion by force because it created the illusion of voluntariness. Soldiers could formally leave the service, but in practice this meant financial bankruptcy and persecution for unpaid debts. The army became a trap from which it was almost impossible to escape with honor and dignity. What if everything you were taught about Roman order was just a pretty picture? Life in the camp that the legionaries built every evening was subject to the strictest routine, but behind the outward organization lay a complete lack of personal space and time. Imagine a modern maximum security prison or a military academy barracks. Even there, prisoners and cadets have more personal space than a Roman legionnaire on campaign. In the modern world, we perceive the right to privacy as a fundamental human need, but for a Roman soldier, such a luxury simply did not exist. If you spent even a week in a Roman contubernum, you would understand that army discipline was achieved not only through severe punishment, but also through the complete deprivation of basic privacy. Soldiers lived in tents called contubernum. 8 people were housed in one such tent. It was their barracks, dining room, and bedroom all at once. There was catastrophically little space. Soldiers slept huddled together on straw mattresses, surrounded by their equipment. The concept of personal space simply did not exist. The contubernum was about 10 square meters in size, which meant just over 1 square meter per person, less than the size of a modern prison cell. This space had to accommodate not only 8 people, but also all their personal belongings, weapons, armor, and camping equipment. The soldiers literally slept on top of each other, and any movement by one was immediately felt by all the others. Straw mattresses quickly became breeding grounds for parasites, lice, fleas, and ticks. It was only possible to change the straw if suitable materials were available, which was rarely the case in field conditions. Soldiers slept on the same mattress for months, which became saturated with sweat, dirt, and blood, becoming a source of infection and unpleasant odors. Equipment took up a significant portion of the already limited space. Armor, shields, spears, and swords had to be stored in a strictly defined order for quick access in case of an alarm. This meant that soldiers slept surrounded by sharp metal, which created an additional risk of injury during sleep. The entire day was scheduled down to the minute, from wake up to lights out. Morning roll call, drills, camp work, cleaning weapons. A soldier did not have a single free minute to be alone. He was constantly in the sight of his comrades and commanders. The wake-up call came at the first sound of the bugle, long before dawn. Soldiers had to get up immediately, get themselves ready, and line up for inspection. Any delay was punished by the entire contubernum. The day was divided into clearly defined intervals, each of which was devoted to a specific activity, from physical exercises to repairing equipment. There was no free time in the modern sense of the word. Even short breaks between activities were used to perform mandatory tasks, cleaning weapons, repairing clothing, or preparing for the next activity. Soldiers could never just sit down and do nothing, as this would immediately attract the attention of the centurions. Sanitary conditions in the camp, where thousands of people lived, were far from ideal. Despite the presence of latrines, it was difficult to maintain cleanliness. Any oversight in hygiene could lead to unpleasant consequences for the entire unit. Food was prepared centrally, but most often the soldiers cooked their own soup from the grain they were given. The diet was monotonous and not particularly refined. It was food to sustain strength, not for pleasure. The process of cooking in the contubernum was a source of additional conflict. 8 hungry, tired men had to agree on who would cook, who would fetch water, and who would light the fire. At the same time, each had his own preferences regarding how to cook porridge and how much salt to add. Disputes over food were a daily occurrence. Fuel for cooking had to be gathered independently, which added another responsibility to an already overloaded daily routine. In wooded areas, this was relatively easy, but in deserts or steppes, soldiers were forced to use animal manure or even their own clothes as fuel. The constant noise, cramped conditions, and lack of privacy created enormous psychological pressure. Soldiers were deprived of their individuality. They were part of a single organism, and their personal needs were ignored. The psychological impact of the constant presence of other people was devastating for the human psyche. The inability to be alone, to think about one's own thoughts, to cry, or simply to be silent led to nervous breakdowns, depression, and aggression. Many soldiers developed various mental disorders that were not understood or treated at the time. The lack of privacy meant that any personal information immediately became public knowledge. Soldiers knew all the details of each other's personal lives, from financial problems to intimate experiences. This created an atmosphere of mutual blackmail and made it impossible to keep personal secrets. Even short hours of rest were supervised. Gambling was officially prohibited, although soldiers found ways to circumvent this ban. But any offense was severely punished. This system was designed to completely control the life of a legionnaire. He was not supposed to have time for extraneous thoughts. All his energy had to be devoted to service. Control over thoughts was achieved through control over time and space. When a person has no time to think about their own life, they cease to be an individual and become a functional unit of the military machine. It was a primitive but effective form of psychological programming that turned free citizens into obedient executors of orders. But how was discipline maintained under these conditions? In the next chapter, you will learn about the most important instrument of power in the Roman army, which was feared more than the enemy's sword.
He was disciplined for its small nation. You have to be careful what you say.
When the guns are silent, the muses are not, but the Roman legionaries are hard at work. Periods without active combat did not mean rest for the soldiers. On the contrary, it was in peacetime that the heaviest and most extensive work fell on their shoulders. The Roman Empire was famous for its engineering structures, roads, aqueducts, bridges, and defensive ramparts. And the main workforce on these grandiose construction sites were the legionnaires. Their service was endless labor. Soldiers built the famous Roman roads that connected the most remote corners of the empire. They broke stones, prepared the foundation, and laid paving stones. It was hellish work that required enormous physical effort and engineering skills. They erected aqueducts that brought water to cities. They built bridges across rivers that were considered impassable. The hands of legionnaires built such famous structures as Hadrian's Wall in Britain. This work never stopped. Upon completing one project, the legion was immediately transferred to another. Soldiers spent more time with pickaxes and shovels than with swords. The command saw this constant labor as a way to maintain discipline. It was believed that idleness corrupted soldiers. Therefore, they had to be constantly occupied with work so that they would have no strength or time for discontent. For a legionnaire, this meant that his service was devoid of respite. If there was no war, there was construction. Both required complete exertion of strength. This construction activity was of enormous strategic importance. Roads allowed troops to be moved quickly, and fortifications protected the borders. But for the ordinary soldier, it was just another form of hard and often meaningless labor. He might not see the enemy for years, but every day he had to struggle with stone, clay, and wood. His body was worn out, not in battle, but on construction sites. By the end of their service, many legionnaires were exhausted not by war, but by labor. That is why service in the legion was not so much military as it was engineering and construction. A legionnaire was a universal worker, capable of performing any task. But the price of this versatility was his own health and life. What I am about to show you was the basis of the entire Roman army. The foundation on which all its power rested was not valor, but iron discipline, and it was maintained by methods based on constant fear. The main symbol of this authority was the centurion's rod, made from a grapevine. It was not just a badge of distinction, but a tool for maintaining order. The centurion had the right to use it on any soldier for the slightest offense. Punishments were an integral part of army life. The loss of weapons, sleeping on duty, or disobeying orders were followed by severe penalties. The system was designed so that soldiers feared their commander more than the enemy. There were also collective punishments. The most terrible of these was decimation, when every 10th soldier in the offending unit was executed. This measure was rarely used, but the mere possibility of it kept entire legions in constant tension. Even everyday duties were accompanied by the threat of punishment. Improperly cleaned weapons, untidy uniforms, slowness in performing tasks, all of this could be grounds for punishment. Soldiers lived in an atmosphere of total control. This system did not breed heroism, but rather obedience and submissiveness. Legionnaires fought bravely not so much out of patriotism as out of fear of what awaited them if they retreated. Fleeing the battlefield was punishable by death. Centurions were the backbone of the army precisely because they were the bearers of this disciplinary power. They were experienced and hardened warriors who maintained order with an iron fist. They were both feared and respected. This cruel system was effective. It turned a crowd of recruits into a well-coordinated mechanism capable of carrying out any orders. But it also deprived soldiers of all initiative and human dignity. A legionnaire had no rights whatsoever in the eyes of his commanders. His life and health depended entirely on their will. This created enormous psychological pressure, which not everyone could withstand. Do you think the effectiveness of this system justified its cruelty? In the next chapter, we will talk about what awaited a soldier after 25 years of such service and why the long-awaited retirement often turned out to be a disappointment. A legionnaire's diet served one purpose: to provide the body with cheap fuel for hard work. Taste, variety, or enjoyment of food were not considered. The diet was meager, monotonous, and often simply unpalatable. The basis of the diet was grain, mainly wheat or barley. Soldiers received it in the form of whole grains. They had to grind them themselves on hand mills and prepare their own food. Most often, this flour was used to bake unleavened flatbread or cook thick porridge. The main dish was the so-called bucellatum, hard, dried bread or rusks. It could be stored for a long time, but chewing it was a real challenge. The second important element of the diet was pasca, a drink made from water and sour wine or vinegar. It quenched thirst well and had some antiseptic properties, but its taste was, to put it mildly, an acquired taste. Meat was a rarity in the diet. It was only given out before battles or on major holidays. It was usually salted pork or bacon, which had to be soaked for a long time before cooking. Sometimes soldiers managed to diversify their menu by foraging or buying food from local residents. But this was only possible in rich areas and required money, which the legionnaires hardly had. In most cases, they ate the same thing for many years: cheese, olives, vegetables. All of these were considered delicacies. The standard diet was designed to provide maximum nutrition at minimum cost. It was a diet for survival, not for proper nutrition. Such a monotonous diet inevitably affected health. The lack of vitamins and minerals led to various ailments. But no one paid any attention to this as long as the soldiers could hold their weapons. The constant consumption of coarse and tough food also caused digestive and dental problems. For many soldiers, food was not a source of joy, but a daily necessity that simply had to be endured. Their diet was yet another trial in a series of endless hardships. The Roman army demanded complete dedication from its soldiers. They had to devote not only their time and energy to service, but also their personal lives. Throughout most of the classical era, legionaries were officially prohibited from entering into legal marriage. This ban was introduced so that soldiers would not be tied to one place. The army had to remain mobile. It was believed that family distracted a warrior from his direct duties and made him less effective in battle. However, human nature could not be abolished by order. Soldiers who had been stationed in the provinces for years entered into informal relationships with local women. These unions had no legal force, but were in fact real families. Children were born in such barracks marriages. They could not bear their father's name and had no right to inheritance. Their status, like that of their mothers, was extremely uncertain and depended entirely on the goodwill of the soldier. Entire settlements grew up around large military camps, where these unofficial families of legionnaires lived. These were noisy and crowded places where life was far from stable. The fate of their inhabitants depended entirely on the fate of the legion. When the legion was transferred to a new location, the soldier was faced with a difficult choice. He could either abandon his family or try to take them with him, which was fraught with enormous difficulties. Many families broke up precisely because of these transfers. This prohibition created constant emotional tension. Soldiers were deprived of the normal family life they could have had as civilians. Their relationships lacked legal protection and stability. Only after retiring could a veteran legalize his union and recognize his children. But to do so, he had to live to the end of his service. A man spent 25 years in limbo, unable to legally start a family. This policy, aimed at increasing the combat effectiveness of the army, had serious social consequences. It created a whole generation of people with uncertain status. The life of a legionnaire was deprived of one of the most fundamental human rights, the right to a family. The main goal that sustained legionnaires throughout their 25 years of service was the hope of a decent pension. The state promised veterans a land grant and Roman citizenship for non-citizens. This was the reward that made all the hardships worthwhile. However, reality often differed from expectations. Receiving a pension was not an automatic process. It depended on many factors, including the economic situation in the empire and the will of the emperor. Payments were often delayed for years. Veterans had to wait for their reward while living in poverty. Sometimes the state tried to replace the land grant with a cash payment, which was barely enough to live on. Even when land was allocated, it was not always of good quality. Often, these were undeveloped areas on the borders of the empire, which first had to be conquered from nature or hostile tribes. The pension became yet another ordeal. Veterans were often settled in colonies in newly conquered provinces. In this way, they continued to perform a military function, serving as a bulwark of Roman power in hostile territory. Their peaceful life was very conditional. The deepest scars left by service were not on the body, but on the soul. Constant tension, fear, monotony, and separation from home left an indelible mark on the legionnaire's psyche. This was a price that was not mentioned in the victory reports. 25 years is a long time, during which a person was completely cut off from their roots. They forgot about peaceful life and lost touch with their relatives. Their only family became the Legion, which lived by its own harsh laws. The constant threat to life and the need to obey orders suppressed the will and personality. The soldier became a function, a cog in a huge machine. He was taught not to think, but to obey, which led to a loss of individuality. Life in a male collective, based on hierarchy and force, also deformed their character. Rudeness, a habit of obedience, and an inability to build normal relationships all became part of the veterans' personality. It was difficult for them to find their place in civilian society. Many veterans suffered from what we would today call post-traumatic stress disorder. Memories of battles and the cruelty of Army life haunted them until the end of their days. But in those days, no one was involved in psychological rehabilitation. Long separation from home meant that veterans simply had nowhere to return to. Over a quarter of a century, parents died. Brothers and sisters grew up and moved away. They became strangers in their native places. That is why many veterans preferred to settle in colonies with their fellow servicemen. Only in their circle could they feel comfortable. They created their own world because they could not fit into someone else's. This social isolation was perhaps the heaviest price to pay for service. Having given the best years of their lives to the Empire, people found themselves excluded from normal society. They were heroes in war, but became outsiders in peacetime. Service in the Roman army was a one-way street. It changed a person forever, and not always for the better. Behind the outward power of the legions lay millions of broken lives. We can see that the life of an ordinary Roman legionnaire was far from the romantic image we imagine. It was exhausting and thankless work that required incredible endurance and humility. Behind the glory of the commanders and the greatness of the empire lay the daily titanic labor of nameless soldiers. Their main enemy was not the barbarians, but the weight of their own equipment, the monotony of marching, an unfair economic system, and iron discipline. They were not so much warriors as builders, porters, and eternal debtors. Their fate is a stark reminder of the real price of any conquest. Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. Perhaps you are interested in the daily life of the Vikings or the secrets of samurai training. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new research into the hidden sides of history.